Well, it's time to start making up laminated deck beams. I've got all this Oregon from a building site, free of charge. There was a whole stack of it next to the boat. Yesterday, Roger and I cut up, I don't know how many, but we've got to make, I think, 18 or 19 beams for the cabin roofs. So they're going to be 4 laminations and about 23.50 long is the biggest that we need. So they'll be roughly 46, 47 maybe 45 millimeters wide, and about 54 millimeters thick. So they'll be nice, sturdy little beams, and they'll be laminated on a jig. Anyway, I've got a few more to cut out, and then we should have enough to do it. I had thought that I would have to scarf pieces together to make up the length, but I thought there would be too many knots in this timber and too many short pieces. So I've managed to get enough long pieces out, I think, to do the whole of the 18 or 19 deck beams, all in single lengths. And if I have to scarf a few, that doesn't matter. So I'll go back to cutting out now. In making these deck beams, I've made a total of about 130 millimeters in height at the center, and the overall length of the beam is 23.50, I think is the largest beam. Now normally when you make a deck beam camber, you would divide this arc into either 3 or 4, and then divide this section of the arc into either 3 or 4, and then join those lines up, and then take that height and place it at the 1/3 mark here, and then place that height and take it at the 1/3 mark here. Now that gives you an arc which it's not a part of a circle. It gives you the first third is slightly higher than if it were the arc of a circle,
and also the next section would be slightly higher than a section, so the slightly higher than the arc of a circle. So what it gives you is a more flat area, and at the outer edge you have more of a curve downwards. So because I'm using the same camber all the way through the deck beams, so like everyone's going to be the same camber, I've made them an arc of a circle. So I've taken this measurement from here to the base and used that at the first third, and then I've taken the second one from there to the base and made that for the outer measurement. Now that gives me an arc which is of a circle, so as I lay these deck beams up, they will all have the same curve from the centre to the outside, so they'll be easier to fair in. So if you're going to use this system and then you've got varying widths of beams, then you should do your camber arc for every beam width, which is a lot more difficult. So I don't know if that explains what I'm doing, but that's what I'm doing. Well, that allows for 5 millimetres of spring back. So our deck camber is 125 millimetres over, and that'll be a nice deck camber, I think. Yep, there we go. Some of these pieces of timber that I have, which are second-hand out of the roof of the house, are too short to make up a full deck beam, so I'm scarfing them together, and that's what I'm doing today. It's about a 4.5, maybe 120 millimetres. Maybe I'll measure it. Okay, yeah, that's about 115. 110? Yeah, 110, 115. 115 millimetre scarf. So I'm just joining them up on the bench here, and then I can laminate them into full beams later on. I'm using West System glue, epoxy, with microfiber filler. And the reason I'm using that, the only reason I'm using that in preference to any other brand, is that they have a pump system for the mixing of it, which gets the amounts of hardener versus resin exactly in the right proportions.
well, that's all there is for the moment for deck beams. Hope you enjoyed that. Bit of fun. I've only, as you saw, I only did one beam through the thicknesser just to see what it was like, and I quite like it. The size is just nice. So, and even though I said in the beginning there'd only be 18 or 19 beams, I decided to do a few extra, and that way I can use a slightly thinner cabin top and use a few more beams. So I've ended up with 24, or I think 25 I've ended up with. So I've got a couple of spares in case I mess something up as well. Far easier to make them now than it is to set up that jig and do them again. So see you next time. Thanks for watching.